The cheap diner coffee was acid in Riley's stomach, doing nothing to quell the tremor in her hands. Every shadow in the parking lot looked like him, like one of Alpha Marcus's enforcers sent to drag her back. Her wolf, a faint, whimpering thing she hadn't felt in years, was silent, offering no comfort, no strength. It had gone dormant under the constant barrage of cruelty, leaving her achingly, terrifyingly human. She had $27, a threadbare jacket, and a plan so flimsy it was more of a prayer. Get a car, drive north, disappear into the human lands where the treaties made it difficult for packs to follow. The plan hit a snag at the first step. Every car in the lot was either a rusted pickup truck that would die in 10 miles or a sensible sedan that was likely locked. Except one. A long black car sat at the edge of the lot, its paint so deep it seemed to drink the faint moonlight. It hummed with a quiet power that was utterly out of place in this forgotten corner of the world. It was audacious, impossible, and her only chance. Her fingers, clumsy with fear, found the handle. It was locked. Of course it was locked. A sob of frustration caught in her throat. She looked around desperately, and her eyes fell on a jagged piece of concrete near the dumpster. She grabbed it, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. With a whispered prayer to any deity that might listen, she swung the concrete against the driver's side window. The glass exploded inward with a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. She froze, waiting for alarms, for shouts, for the inevitable hand on her shoulder. Nothing. Silence. With shaking hands, she reached through the broken window and unlocked the door. She slid inside, the leather seats sighing as they took her weight, shards of glass crunching beneath her. It smelled of pine and ozone and something else. Something deeply masculine and commanding that made the hairs on her arms stand up. The keys were in the ignition. A miracle. Or a trap. She didn't care. With a final, desperate glance over her shoulder, she turned the key. The engine purred to life, a low, predatory growl that vibrated through her bones. She pulled out of the lot, tires spitting gravel, and pushed the car onto the empty highway, pressing the accelerator to the floor. The world blurred into streaks of darkness and distant light. Freedom. The word was a foreign taste on her tongue. For 20 miles, she was nothing but a heartbeat and a prayer, the speedometer needle climbing higher and higher. The past was a monster at her heels, and she was outrunning it. You drive like you're running from something. The voice was a deep, calm baritone from the back seat, and it hit her with the force of a physical blow. A scream tore from her throat as she swerved, the tires shrieking in protest. The car fishtailed across the empty lanes before she wrestled it back under control, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. She slammed on the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a screeching halt in the middle of the deserted road. In the rearview mirror, a man was sitting up. He hadn't been there a second ago. He was large, his shoulders broad enough to fill the entire back window, and even in the dim light she could see his features were sharp and aristocratic. He ran a hand through his dark hair, looking more inconvenienced than alarmed. "Apologies," he said, his voice laced with a faint, mocking amusement. "I didn't mean to startle you into an early grave. Ours, or anyone else's who might have been on this road." Riley couldn't breathe. An alpha. The scent she'd noticed before now flooded the car, a powerful, overwhelming wave of authority and dominance. It wasn't the stale, brutish scent of Marcus. This was cleaner, sharper, like a storm rolling in over a forest. It promised power, but not necessarily cruelty. Still, her body reacted with the ingrained terror of an Omega who knew her place. She flinched, curling in on herself, trying to make herself smaller. "Please," she whispered, the word cracking. "I'll get out. I had to get away." He was silent for a long moment. She could feel his gaze on her in the mirror, dissecting her, reading her terror like a book. The amusement in his tone had vanished completely. "Who did this to you?" he asked, and his voice was different now. It was flat, cold, and heavy with a pressure that made the air feel thick. She risked a glance at the mirror again. His eyes were fixed on her reflection, on the split in her lip from Marcus's backhand that morning, on the faint yellowing bruises that circled her thin wrists where she'd been held down. She couldn't answer. Naming her alpha was a betrayal that would earn her a punishment she couldn't imagine surviving. He didn't need her to answer. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so primal it bypassed her ears and resonated deep in her bones. It wasn't directed at her. It was a promise of violence for someone else. "Keep driving," he commanded. It wasn't a request. The authority in his voice was absolute, the kind that brooked no argument. It was the voice of a true alpha, a leader, not just a bully. Terrified, she put the car back in gear and pulled onto the highway, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the wheel. The powerful stranger in her stolen car settled back into his seat. He pulled out a sleek, modern phone, his thumb swiping across the screen. "Get me Kale," he said into the device, his voice dangerously soft. "Now." Riley drove into the night, a captive of the man she'd accidentally kidnapped, her fate once again in the hands of an alpha. But as she listened to the quiet, lethal commands he began to issue from the back seat, a strange, terrifying flicker of something that felt almost like hope began to ignite in the desolate landscape of her heart. The man in the back seat, Caspian, she learned, as he spoke into his phone, did not speak to her again for nearly an hour. He simply issued a calm, unending stream of orders to the person named Kale. His voice never rose, but the power contained within it was immense. It was the quiet confidence of a man who had never in his life had an order questioned. He spoke of asset seizures, of pack registry violations, of deploying Royal Guard units to a place called Stone Creek Ridge. Riley's blood ran cold. That was Marcus's territory. Her pack. Her prison. She was driving away from it, but the man in the back was reaching into it, his influence extending like an invisible hand to choke the life from the place she'd just escaped. "And Kale," Caspian said, his voice dropping lower, colder. "I want Alpha Marcus Thorne and his inner circle detained immediately. He is to be brought to the capital under heavy guard for trial. Inform the Northern Council that I am invoking the King's prerogative on charges of gross misconduct and violation of the Omega Protection Accords. Full investigation to begin at dawn." King's prerogative. The words hung in the air, sucking the breath from Riley's lungs. King. She had stolen the Alpha King's car. She had kidnapped the ruler of all the packs in the Western Territories. The coffee she'd drunk churned violently in her stomach, and a wave of dizziness washed over her. She was dead. Marcus would have killed her for insubordination. The punishment for laying hands on the king, however accidentally, was unthinkable. "Pull over here," Caspian commanded, his phone call apparently finished. She obeyed instantly, her body moving on pure instinct. She steered the car onto the gravel shoulder of the road, the engine idling with a soft rumble. The silence was deafening. She waited for the door to open, for him to drag her out and pass judgment. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. Instead, she heard the rustle of clothing and the soft click of a seatbelt. The back door opened and closed, followed a moment later by the passenger door. He slid into the seat beside her, and the sheer force of his presence was overwhelming. He was even larger up close, his scent of pine and storm filling the small space, pushing out the stale air of fear. She dared not look at him, keeping her eyes fixed on the cracked dashboard. "Look at me," he said. His voice was soft, but it was still a command. Slowly, trembling, she turned her head. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, she saw his face clearly for the first time. He was devastatingly handsome, with a strong jaw, high cheekbones, and dark, intelligent eyes that were currently fixed on her with unnerving intensity. His gaze dropped to her split lip. Without a word, he reached out. Riley flinched violently, a choked sob escaping her as she pressed herself against the driver's side door, expecting a blow. His hand froze in midair. A muscle feathered in his jaw, and a look of profound pain crossed his features. "I will not hurt you," he said, his voice raw. My wolf would tear me apart from the inside out before it let me harm you." The statement made no sense to her, but the sincerity in his tone was undeniable. He slowly, carefully, retracted his hand. "I am Caspian Vale," he said formally. "You are in my protection now. No one will harm you again. I swear it on my crown." The words were a balm on wounds she hadn't even known were still bleeding. Protection. The concept was so foreign, so utterly alien. Omegas were possessions, things to be used and discarded, not protected. "Why?" she whispered, the single word encompassing all her confusion and fear. "Why would you help me?" Caspian looked out at the dark road ahead. The endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom. "Because no alpha worthy of the name allows a member of his pack to be treated as you have been," he said, though she was not of his pack. "And because my wolf has taken an interest in your well-being." He turned his gaze back to her, and his dark eyes seemed to hold a universe of secrets. "What is your name?" "Riley," she breathed. "Riley Dawson." "Riley," he repeated, and her name on his lips sounded like a promise. "Rest now. I will drive." The thought of arguing was non-existent. She slid numbly out of the car as he walked around to the driver's side. They switched places, and as he took the wheel, she curled up in the passenger seat, pulling her thin jacket tighter around herself. For the first time in a decade, the terror that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by an exhaustion so deep it felt as if it went down to her bones. As the Alpha King drove them toward the rising sun and his royal territory, Riley Dawson fell into a dreamless sleep, unaware that she was not a captive, but a rescued soul being brought home. The royal estate was not a place, it was a world unto itself. As they passed through the towering silver gates, flanked by guards whose armor gleamed even in the soft morning light, Riley felt as if she had crossed into a different reality. The long, winding drive was lined with ancient oaks, their branches forming a canopy overhead. Expansive, manicured lawns rolled away on either side, dotted with vibrant flower beds and serene, reflective pools. In the distance, she could see the training grounds, where wolves in both human and animal form moved with disciplined grace. The palace itself was a masterpiece of stone and glass, a structure that managed to be both imposing and elegant. It rose against the backdrop of the mountains, its towers seeming to scrape the sky. It was a symbol of power, of history, of a world she had only ever heard about in whispered stories. Caspian brought the car to a smooth stop before the grand entrance, where a small group of people were waiting. A man with silvering hair and a kind face, Kale, she presumed, stepped forward and opened Caspian's door. Another woman, older, with a stern but not unkind expression, opened Riley's. Riley hesitated, her hand clutching the door. This was too much. The opulence, the quiet efficiency, the sheer scale of it all. It was a golden cage, and she had learned long ago that all cages, no matter how gilded, were still prisons. Caspian must have sensed her fear. He came around the car and stood before her open door, blocking her view of the others. He didn't reach for her, but simply stood there, his presence a solid, reassuring wall. "This is a sanctuary, Riley, not a prison," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. "You are a guest here. You may come and go as you please within the territory. My only request is that you stay within our borders until we are certain all of Marcus Thorne's loyalists are accounted for. The investigation has only just begun." He offered his hand. It was a simple gesture, but for Riley, it was monumental. No alpha had ever offered her a choice, or a hand in anything other than anger. After a long, heart-thumping moment, she placed her trembling fingers in his palm. His hand was warm and large, engulfing hers completely. The touch sent a strange jolt of energy through her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. It felt right. He helped her from the car, his touch gentle, and led her toward the waiting staff. "This is Riley Dawson. Caspian announced, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of finality that quelled any potential questions. She is under my personal protection. She is to be given the Aspen suite and afforded every comfort. Alara, he said, turning to the older woman, you will attend to her personally. The woman, Alara, bowed her head slightly. Of course, Your Majesty. She then turned her gaze to Riley, and her stern expression softened with something that looked like sympathy. Come, child, you look exhausted. Let's get you settled. Riley let go of Caspian's hand, the loss of contact leaving her feeling suddenly cold. She followed Alara into the palace, her worn-out sneakers silent on the polished marble floors. The interior was even more breathtaking than the outside, with soaring ceilings, beautiful tapestries, and sunlight streaming through vast windows. It was a place of beauty and peace, the complete antithesis of the dark, damp Omega quarters she had grown up in. The Aspen suite was larger than the entire cabin she had shared with 3 other Omegas. It had a soft, inviting bed piled high with pillows, a sitting area with a fireplace, and a private balcony that overlooked a stunning garden. The adjoining bathroom was a marvel of marble and gold, with a tub deep enough to swim in. Alara showed her how to work the fixtures, her voice gentle. A hot bath will help with the aches, she said kindly. I will have a meal sent up for you, and some clean clothes. Rest. You are safe here. After Alara left, Riley stood in the center of the vast room, feeling utterly adrift. She walked over to the bed and pressed her hand against the soft duvet. Safety. The word echoed in her mind. She had been running toward it her whole life, and now that she'd found it, she didn't know what to do. She stripped off her grimy clothes and drew a bath, sinking into the steaming, fragrant water. The heat soothed her bruised muscles, and as she scrubbed away the dirt and grime of her old life, she began to cry. The tears were silent at first. Then they came in ragged, wrenching sobs. Tears for the girl she had been, for the years she had lost, and for the terrifying, uncertain future that lay ahead. She wasn't a prisoner, but she wasn't free either. She was a guest of the king, a strange creature he'd brought home, and she had no idea what he wanted from her. Meanwhile, in Caspian's private study, Kale stood before his king with a tablet in hand, his expression carefully neutral. Caspian had dismissed his formal attire and stood by the window in shirt sleeves, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Report, Caspian said. Marcus Thorne and 6 of his enforcers have been detained without incident, Kale began. They're being held at the Northern Garrison, pending transport to the capital for trial. The Northern Council has granted your request to invoke King's prerogative. They'll convene a tribunal within the month. Not fast enough, Caspian growled. I want it within 2 weeks. Your Majesty, the evidence gathering alone will take. Then expedite it. Use every resource we have. Kale paused, then spoke carefully. Caspian, I've known you for 20 years. I've never seen you this invested in a case. What's going on? Caspian turned from the window, and Kale was startled by the intensity in his friend's eyes. She has no wolf scent, Caspian said quietly. I noticed, Kale replied. A wolfless Omega. That's rare, but not. She's not wolfless, Caspian interrupted. Her wolf is there, buried deep. I can sense it. Kale frowned. That's impossible. If her wolf were present, we'd smell it. Not if it's dormant. Kale's eyes widened. Dormant? I thought that was just a legend from the old texts. It's rare, Caspian confirmed, walking to his bookshelf and pulling out an ancient leather-bound volume. He flipped it open to a marked page. When an Omega endures sustained brutality, the wolf can retreat into dormancy to preserve the human's sanity. It's a survival mechanism. The wolf essentially goes into hibernation, leaving almost no trace of its presence. Most don't survive long enough for it to happen, which is why it's so rarely documented. Can it be awakened? Caspian's jaw tightened. Only when the Omega feels truly safe, and even then it requires a catalyst, a reason to fight, a reason to emerge. And you think you can provide that? I know I can, Caspian said, his voice dropping. My wolf recognized hers the moment I saw her in that mirror. It called to her sleeping wolf, Kale. She's my mate. Kale sucked in a sharp breath. In all their years together, through battles and political intrigue, he'd never seen his king so certain, so completely undone by a single person. Does she know? Not yet. She's too traumatized to understand what she's feeling. The mate bond is there, but muted by her wolf's dormancy and her own fear. I'll give her time. I'll give her as much time as she needs. And if Marcus escapes during transport? Kale asked quietly. He won't, Caspian said, his voice cold as winter. But if he does, if he comes anywhere near her, I will tear him apart with my bare hands and let my wolf feast on what's left. Double the guard on his detention. Triple it. I want hourly reports. Kale bowed. Consider it done. The first few weeks passed in a blur of quiet healing. True to his word, Caspian left her alone. He afforded her a level of privacy and autonomy she had never known. Elara became her silent guardian, a comforting presence who anticipated her needs without being intrusive. She brought her meals on silver trays, laid out soft, simple clothes that felt like a caress against her skin, and kept the fire lit in her suite. The physical wounds faded first. The split on her lip healed, the bruises on her wrists yellowed and then disappeared. Riley noticed her body responding to the safety and nourishment in ways that surprised her. Her gaunt frame began to fill out, color returned to her cheeks, and she no longer woke every hour expecting violence. Elara had mentioned quietly one morning, while changing the linens, that being near one's true mate could have restorative effects, even before a bond was sealed. Riley hadn't understood the comment then, but she filed it away in the growing list of mysteries surrounding this place. For the first week, Riley barely left her rooms. She slept, ate, and took long baths, trying to scrub away the phantom touch of Marcus's hands. She would stand on her balcony for hours, watching the life of the palace unfold below her. She saw Caspian often. He would be walking the grounds with Kale, his beta and second-in-command, their heads bent in serious discussion. She saw him on the training grounds, sparring with his warriors, his movements a fluid dance of power and control. He moved like a king, with an innate confidence and authority that was in his every gesture. He never looked up at her balcony, but sometimes she felt a prickling on her skin, a strange awareness, as if he knew she was watching. One afternoon, driven by a restlessness she couldn't contain, she ventured out into the gardens. They were a labyrinth of beauty, with fragrant rose bushes, winding stone paths, and hidden benches tucked away in secluded alcoves. She found a spot near a gentle, burbling fountain and sat, letting the sun warm her face. It was the first time in years she had felt the sun, without fear of being called back to a list of grueling chores. She closed her eyes, soaking in the peace. They are called starlight roses. They only bloom under a full moon, but their scent lingers for weeks. The voice was Caspian's. Her eyes flew open. He was standing a few feet away, dressed not in royal finery, but in simple black trousers and a soft gray shirt. He looked less like a king and more like a man. Her first instinct was to bolt, to retreat back to the safety of her room. But she held her ground, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. He didn't move closer, respecting her space. "They're beautiful," she managed to say, her voice rusty from disuse. He nodded, his eyes on the roses, not on her. "My mother planted this garden. She said that beauty was a kind of strength, a reminder that even in the darkest times, something good can grow." The mention of his mother, the vulnerability in the statement, surprised her. It was a glimpse behind the crown, a peek at the man beneath. They stood in a comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the splash of the fountain and the buzz of bees in the flowers. "Kale informs me that Marcus Thorne has been formally charged," he said, his tone shifting to one of quiet formality. "The tribunal will convene in 10 days. He and his inner circle are being held under maximum security at the northern garrison. Your old pack is under the temporary regency of Alpha Catherine Reeves from the neighboring Silverpine territory. She's a good leader, fair and just. The Omegas have been freed from servitude and are being given a choice to stay or relocate with full support. You have nothing to fear from them ever again. The news was a weight lifting from her shoulders she hadn't realized she was still carrying. It was truly over. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate but all she had. "You didn't have to do any of that." "Yes," he said, finally turning his gaze to meet hers. His dark eyes were intense, searching. "I did. My wolf demanded it." The words went unsaid, but she felt them hanging in the air between them. His wolf. He'd mentioned it before. She didn't understand the connection, but she could feel it. A strange pull toward him, a current of energy that was both frightening and exhilarating. Her own wolf, so long silent, seemed to stir in its sleep, a faint flicker of warmth in her chest. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then turned and walked away, leaving her alone by the fountain. She watched him go, a storm of conflicting emotions warring inside her. He was an alpha. He was a king. He was everything she had been taught to fear. And yet, he had shown her nothing but kindness. He had given her freedom, sanctuary, and justice. He was slowly, patiently, dismantling every wall she had built around her heart. And the most terrifying part was, she was beginning to want to let him. As Riley grew more comfortable, she began to explore the palace. She discovered a vast library filled with the scent of old paper and leather, a music room with a grand piano that sat silent and waiting, and a gallery of portraits of stern-faced ancestors of the Vale line. She kept to the quiet corners, a ghost haunting the edges of royal life, but she was observing, learning. One rainy afternoon, she found herself alone in the library, drawn to a section labeled Pack Law and History. She pulled out a thick volume, bound in deep green leather, the title embossed in gold, The Accords and Governance of the Western Territories. As she settled into a window seat with the heavy book, Ilara appeared with a tea tray. "Ah, curious about our world, are you?" the older woman said with an approving smile. "That's a good sign, child." "I don't understand how things work here," Riley admitted. "Where I came from, there were no books, no explanations, just orders and punishments." Ilara set down the tray and settled into the chair opposite her. "Then let me help you make sense of it. What you're holding is essentially our Constitution." Over the next hour, Ilara explained what Riley had never been taught. The pack hierarchy wasn't meant to be a system of oppression, but of organization. Alphas were leaders, born with the strength and instinct to protect and guide. Betas were their seconds, advisors, and enforcers. Gammas were warriors and guardians. Deltas were the skilled workers, craftspeople, teachers, healers. And Omegas, contrary to what Riley had experienced, were meant to be the heart of the pack, caregivers and nurturers whose empathy and emotional intelligence held communities together. "Omegas are precious," Ilara said firmly. "Not weak, not servants." The Omega Protection Accords were passed 50 years ago after the territorial wars, when it came to light that some alphas had been abusing their power. The Accords made it illegal to mistreat, enslave, or harm Omegas. Any alpha found in violation can be stripped of rank and imprisoned. "But Marcus did all those things for years," Riley said bitterly. "How?" "Because the kingdom is vast," Ilara said sadly. "Hundreds of packs spread across thousands of miles. The king has the authority to enforce the Accords, but he can't be everywhere at once. Remote packs like Stone Creek Ridge operate in isolation. Alphas like Marcus control all communication with the outside world. Without a formal complaint or evidence, the king's hands are tied. That's why when you appeared, when His Majesty saw the evidence of abuse with his own eyes, he acted immediately. You gave him the justification he needed. Riley absorbed this, understanding dawning. Caspian hadn't just been kind. He'd been doing his duty, upholding laws meant to protect people like her. Elara continued, explaining the king's prerogative, a power that allowed Caspian to bypass normal pack autonomy when the accords were violated. She explained the Northern Council, a body of elder alphas who advised the king and had to approve major decisions like executions or declarations of war. She spoke of the mate bond, the rarest and most sacred connection between wolves. A fated pairing recognized by instinct, celebrated by ceremony, and sealed by choice. When wolves find their true mate, Elara said softly, watching Riley carefully, their wolves recognize each other first. It's like two halves of a soul calling across a void. The bond can feel like emotions bleeding through when you touch, thoughts slipping through in intense moments. After the formal mating ceremony, the bond deepens. Mates can sense each other's feelings, sometimes communicate telepathically, especially in wolf form. They become each other's strength, their anchor. Riley's hands trembled on the teacup. The strange pull she felt toward Caspian, the warmth that flooded through her when he was near, the way her dormant wolf seemed to wake slightly in his presence. It wasn't just gratitude or safety. It was something far more profound. Can a mate bond exist if one wolf is dormant? She asked quietly. Elara's eyes filled with understanding and compassion. Yes, child. The bond exists at the soul level. A dormant wolf can still feel it, though perhaps more faintly. And sometimes the bond itself can be the catalyst that calls a sleeping wolf back home. She saw how Caspian's pack members revered him. They bowed their heads in respect, not in fear. She heard the laughter of children echoing in the corridors, and saw the easy affection between mated pairs. This was not like her old pack, which had been ruled by fear and brutal dominance. This was a family, a community, bound by loyalty and genuine care. And at its center was Caspian. One evening, Elara insisted she join the pack for the evening meal in the Great Hall. The thought sent a spike of panic through her. Being surrounded by so many wolves, so many powerful presences, was a terrifying prospect. But the gentle housekeeper was insistent. The king has requested it, she said, leaving no room for argument. Dressed in a simple blue dress Elara had provided, Riley walked into the hall with her head down, her hands clenched at her sides. The room was vast, filled with long wooden tables and the loud, cheerful chatter of hundreds of pack members. All conversation stopped as she entered. Hundreds of pairs of eyes turned to her, and she felt a hot blush creep up her neck. She was an outsider, a nobody, an omega in the king's hall. She saw a few of the higher-ranking she-wolves whispering behind their hands, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disdain. At the head of the hall, on a slightly raised dais, sat Caspian. He rose as she entered, and the entire hall fell silent. His eyes found hers across the cavernous room, and he offered her a small, encouraging smile. He gestured to the empty seat beside him. A gasp went through the crowd. The seat to the Alpha King's right was a place of honor, reserved for his beta, his family, or his mate. For him to offer it to a strange omega was a statement. Trembling, Riley walked the long aisle between the tables, feeling the weight of every stare. She kept her eyes on Caspian, using him as an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. As she reached the dais, a beautiful, haughty-looking she-wolf with fiery red hair and a dress that dripped with jewels stepped into her path. "Surely there has been a mistake," the woman said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a place for the pack's elite, not for strays." The insult was clear, sharp, and meant to humiliate. Riley froze, the old, familiar shame washing over her. She was about to turn and flee when a low growl echoed from the head table. It was not loud, but it vibrated through the stone floor, a sound of pure, undiluted menace. "Lady Seraphina," Caspian said, his voice dangerously calm. "You forget yourself, and you forget your place." Seraphina paled, her arrogance evaporating like mist. Your Majesty, I only meant— I know what you meant, he cut her off, his eyes flashing with a cold light. Riley is my guest. She will be treated with the respect due to someone under my personal protection. Anyone who shows her disrespect shows it to me. Is that understood? The threat was unmistakable. Serafina bowed her head low, her red hair falling forward to hide her face. Yes, Alpha King. Good, Caspian said, his voice returning to normal, though the edge of steel remained. And Lady Serafina, you will report to Kale tomorrow morning. You are hereby relieved of your court position and reassigned to the northern outpost. Perhaps service there will teach you the meaning of humility. A collective intake of breath swept through the hall. Exile, even a polite one, was a serious consequence. Serafina's face went white as she bowed again and retreated. Caspian turned his gaze back to Riley, his expression softening instantly. Riley, please. He pulled out the chair beside him himself. The message to the pack was undeniable. This Omega was important to him. Riley slowly sat down, her mind reeling. He had defended her, publicly. He had punished a high-ranking noble for her sake. She risked a glance at him. He was watching her, his expression unreadable but for the concern in his eyes. Are you all right? He murmured, his voice for her ears alone. She could only nod, unable to find her voice. Throughout the meal, he was the perfect host, drawing her into quiet conversation, asking her about the books she'd found in the library, telling her amusing stories about his beta, Kale. He made her feel seen, heard, and valued in a way she had never experienced. My wolf recognized you from the first moment. The thought came from nowhere, a whisper in the back of her mind that was not her own. It was warm and certain, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the man beside her. She looked at him, startled, but he was in the middle of a conversation with Kale. Had she imagined it? No, it was her wolf. Her dormant, silent wolf, stirring in response to his. It recognized him. It knew him. And it was telling her something her terrified human heart was not yet ready to accept. You are my mate, my other half. The whisper came again, stronger this time, a feeling of rightness, of coming home, that was so powerful it stole her breath away. She looked at the Alpha King, at this powerful, kind, and protective man, and for the first time, she didn't just see a king. She saw her destiny. The incident in the dining hall changed everything. The pack's demeanor toward her shifted overnight. The whispers and suspicious glances were replaced with nods of respect and hesitant smiles. The noblewomen who had followed Serafina's lead gave Riley a wide berth, their eyes filled with a mixture of wariness and newfound respect. Riley was no longer just a stray, she was the king's interest, and in the rigid hierarchy of werewolf society, that afforded her a status she was wholly unprepared for. Caspian, for his part, seemed determined to bridge the gap between them. He sought her out, not with the overbearing presence of an alpha demanding attention, but with a quiet, patient persistence that slowly chipped away at her defenses. He would find her in the library and recommend a book, leaving it on the table for her without waiting for a response. He appeared in the garden one morning with 2 cups of tea, sitting on the other end of her bench and speaking of the weather and the pack's upcoming harvest festival, until she found herself relaxing and talking with him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Each interaction was a carefully placed stone, building a bridge of trust over the chasm of her past trauma. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply offered his presence, a steady and reassuring constant in her new life. Her wolf, now awake, was a constant hum beneath her skin. It purred with contentment when Caspian was near, and grew restless and agitated when he was gone. It urged her forward, telling her to trust him, to accept the truth that was blooming between them. You are safe with him, it whispered in her mind. He is ours. One evening, a storm rolled in from the mountains, shaking the palace with thunder and wind. Riley had always hated storms. The loud, unpredictable violence of them reminded her too much of Marcus's rages. She sat curled in a chair in her room, jumping at every crash of thunder, her hands wrapped around her knees. A soft knock came at her door. She ignored it, hoping whoever it was would go away. The knock came again, gentle but firm. "Riley, it's Caspian. May I come in?" His voice, even through the thick wood of the door, was a calming balm. She hesitated, then walked to the door and opened it. He stood in the hallway, his hair slightly damp from the rain, his expression etched with concern. "I saw your light on," he said. "I know storms can be unsettling. I thought you might appreciate some company." He held up a small silver tray. On it was a pot of chamomile tea and 2 cups. It was such a simple, thoughtful gesture, it made her throat tighten with emotion. She stepped back, allowing him to enter. He set the tray down on a small table and poured the tea, his movements efficient and graceful. He handed her a cup, his fingers brushing against hers. The brief touch sent a jolt of warmth through her, chasing away some of the chill of her fear. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He sat in the chair opposite hers, sipping his own tea. They didn't speak for a long time, simply listening to the storm rage outside. But his presence filled the room, not with the oppressive dominance she was used to from alphas, but with a quiet strength that felt like a shield. "I used to be afraid of storms too," he said eventually, his voice a low murmur. "My father, the late king, had a temper that mirrored them. When he was angry, the whole palace shook." It was the most personal thing he had ever shared with her. It was a gift, an offering of vulnerability that she knew was rare for a man in his position. "My alpha, Marcus, was the same," she found herself confessing, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "You never knew what would set him off. The silence before the rage was the worst part." Caspian's jaw tightened, and his eyes darkened with a familiar, protective fury. "He will never trouble you again," he said, and it was a vow. "I know," she replied softly, and she did. She believed him. The storm outside began to subside, the thunder fading to a distant rumble. In the quiet aftermath, a new kind of storm was brewing within the room, a swirling current of unspoken emotions and undeniable connection. "Riley," he began, setting his cup down and leaning forward, his gaze intense. "The first moment I saw you, in the back of my car, terrified and hurt but with a fire in your eyes that even you couldn't see, my wolf knew. It knew what my mind was too slow to grasp." He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. "It has been the greatest test of my control to give you this time, to let you heal at your own pace. But my wolf is not patient. It cries out for its mate." Mate. He said the word. The truth she had been circling, the one her own wolf had been whispering to her, was finally spoken aloud. It hung between them, shimmering and powerful. She started, but she didn't know what to say. Her heart was hammering, a wild bird trapped in her ribs. He rose from his chair and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. The gesture was one of supplication, of reverence. An alpha king, kneeling before a broken omega. "I am not asking for an answer now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am only telling you the truth, so that you know every kindness, every moment of protection has not been out of pity. It has been out of something more, something fated." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle, chaste kiss to her knuckles. "When you are ready," he murmured against her skin, "I will be waiting." He then stood and left her room, leaving her with the lingering warmth of his touch and the earth-shattering weight of his confession. She was his mate. The Alpha King's fated mate. The impossible truth settled over her, not with fear, but with a dawning, terrifying, beautiful sense of inevitability. The King's declaration settled into Riley's soul, planting roots. The idea of being his mate, once a terrifying impossibility, now felt like a missing piece of her own identity clicking into place. Her wolf was jubilant, preening under the acknowledgement. It sent waves of warmth and contentment through her, a constant purring reminder of the bond that connected her to Caspian. Yet her human side, the part of her that remembered the pain and betrayal, remained hesitant. It was one thing to be desired by a king, another to accept the role of his queen, to stand beside a man of such immense power and responsibility. The days passed, and Riley found herself watching Caspian more closely. She noticed the weight he carried, the careful decisions he made, the way he listened to every member of his pack, from the lowest delta to his most senior advisors. She saw his strength, yes, but also his compassion, his sense of duty, and the loneliness that sometimes flickered in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Her heart ached for him in those moments. One afternoon, Kale found Caspian in his study, reviewing reports from the garrison. "You need to see this," Kale said, his expression grim. He placed a dispatch on the desk. Caspian read it quickly, his face hardening. "Rogue sightings, near the eastern border. 3 separate reports in the past week," Kale confirmed. "Small groups, moving at night. They scatter before our patrols can engage. It's organized." "Marcus's loyalists," Caspian said darkly. "They know we're holding him. They may be planning something." "I've already doubled the perimeter patrols and put the guard on high alert," Kale said. "The Harvest Moon Festival is in 2 weeks. Should we consider postponing?" "No," Caspian said firmly. "We will not let fear dictate our lives. But increase security. I want guards on every entrance, every window. Nothing gets through." "And Riley?" Caspian's eyes flashed golden for a brief moment. "She doesn't leave the inner palace grounds without a full escort. Assign 2 of our best to shadow her at all times, discreetly. She's been through enough. I won't have her living in fear again." Kale nodded. "And if the rogues make a move during the festival?" "Then we end them," Caspian said coldly. "Permanently." The annual Harvest Moon Festival was approaching, a time of great celebration for Caspian's pack. It was a week-long affair of feasts, games, and culminating in a grand ball under the full moon. Alara presented Riley with a gown for the ball, a beautiful creation of midnight blue silk that shimmered like a star-dusted sky. "The king had it made for you," Alara said, her eyes soft. "He hopes you will attend." The dress was another offering, another patient question. Riley knew her presence at the ball, by his side, would be a silent answer. It would be a public declaration of her intention to accept the bond. The day of the ball arrived, and Riley was a bundle of nerves. Alara helped her with her hair and the simple silver jewelry that accompanied the gown. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The haunted, gaunt creature who had fled Stone Creek was gone. In her place was a woman with clear eyes, healthy skin, and a quiet strength in her posture. She was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to live. Caspian was waiting for her at the bottom of the grand staircase. He was dressed in formal black attire, a silver circlet on his head, the only overt symbol of his rank. When he saw her, he stopped breathing for a second. His eyes, dark and intense, drank her in, and the raw adoration in his gaze made her heart skip a beat. "My mate," his wolf seemed to say, a possessive, proud rumble that she felt more than heard. He offered her his arm. "You are beautiful, Riley," he said, his voice a low, reverent whisper. She placed her hand on his arm, the fine wool of his jacket warm beneath her fingers. "You are not so bad yourself, Your Majesty," she replied, a small, shy smile touching her lips. His answering grin was dazzling. They entered the ballroom together, and just as in the dining hall, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. But this time, the stares were not of suspicion, but of awe and acceptance. They saw not a stray Omega, but their king's chosen. They danced. Caspian was a surprisingly graceful dancer, leading her through the steps with a confident ease. He held her close, one hand on the small of her back, the other holding hers. The heat of his body, the scent of pine and storm, enveloped her. It felt like coming home. "Are you happy here, Riley?" he murmured into her hair as they swayed to the music. Yes, she answered, the simple truth of it surprising her. More than I ever thought I could be. Then stay, he whispered, his voice thick with longing. Stay with me. Be my mate. My Luna, my queen. It was the question she had been waiting for, the one her heart had already answered. She tilted her head back to look at him, to give him her answer. But at that moment, a commotion erupted at the ballroom entrance. A guard stumbled into the room, his face pale, a dark stain spreading across his tunic. Your Majesty, he gasped. Rogues! They've breached the western wall! Chaos erupted. Caspian's head snapped toward the entrance, his entire body going rigid with battle-ready tension. Before he could issue orders, figures cloaked in black dropped from the high-arched windows, landing silently on the ballroom floor. They moved with a chilling efficiency, their eyes cold and hard. The royal guard engaged immediately, their training evident as they formed a protective barrier around the civilians. But the rogues were numerous and well-coordinated. Clearly this was a planned assault. In the center of the attackers was a man with a cruel, familiar face. Marcus Thorne. He was supposed to be in the northern garrison. A sneer twisted his lips as his eyes locked on Riley. There you are, my pet, he snarled. Did you really think you could escape me? You belong to me. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. Her body remembered him, the pain, the fear. She shrank back against Caspian, a whimper escaping her lips. Caspian moved in front of her, shielding her with his body. His transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The kind, patient man was gone, replaced by the Alpha King in his full, lethal glory. A savage growl ripped from his chest, a promise of death to any who dared to touch what was his. You have made your last mistake, Thorne, Caspian snarled, his eyes glowing with a golden light. Explain to me how you're standing in my ballroom when you should be in chains at the northern garrison. Marcus laughed, a sound edged with madness. You think your security is infallible? I had help. Inside help. There are those in your precious pack who don't appreciate you elevating an Omega whore to a position above her betters. The words were meant to wound, and Riley flinched. But Caspian's fury only intensified. She is an Omega, you're right about that, Caspian said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. My Omega, my mate, and you will pay for every scar you ever put on her. The palace guards were engaging the other rogues, the sounds of battle filling the grand hall. Kale had shifted into his massive gray wolf form, tearing through enemies with brutal efficiency, but Marcus only had eyes for Riley, his expression one of twisted obsession. She's mine, he spat, spittle flying from his lips. I owned her for years. You have no claim. You are wrong, Caspian said. The fight began. Marcus lunged with a hidden silver blade, the weapon meant to kill. Caspian was faster, catching his wrist and twisting until bone cracked. Marcus howled but fought with the desperation of a cornered animal. As Caspian engaged him, two other rogues broke through the defensive line and lunged for Riley. She cried out, stumbling backward. There was nowhere to run. One of them grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, fingers digging into the same spots where Marcus's bruises had finally faded. Fear gave way to a surge of pure, primal rage. Not again. She would not be a victim again. Something deep inside her, something ancient and powerful, snapped. A searing heat flooded her veins. Her bones screamed as they began to crack and reshape. Fur, the color of midnight silk, sprouted from her skin. The world exploded into a kaleidoscope of heightened senses, the scent of blood and fear, the sounds of the fight amplified 100-fold. Her scream of terror transformed into a furious snarl. The rogue holding her was thrown back as she completed the shift. She was a wolf. Not a small, timid Omega wolf, but a large, sleek black wolf with eyes that burned with silver fire. Her dormant power, awakened by the bond with her alpha mate and unleashed by her will to survive, had finally broken free. She was magnificent. She was fury incarnate, and she was ready to fight. Riley's first moments as a wolf were a dizzying surge of instinct and power. The world was sharper, brighter, a symphony of scents and sounds she had never known. The fear was gone, burned away by the fire of her transformation. All that remained was a singular, driving purpose: protect her mate. She saw Caspian locked in a deadly struggle with Marcus, who was a formidable fighter despite his cruelty. While Caspian was stronger, Marcus fought dirty, using every underhanded tactic he'd learned in his years as a tyrant. As Riley watched, one of the other rogues tried to flank Caspian, a silver knife gleaming in his hand, aimed at her mate's exposed side. With a snarl that was pure predator, Riley launched herself across the floor. She hit the rogue with the force of a battering ram, her jaws closing on his shoulder. He screamed, dropping the knife as her teeth sank deep. She shook her head, a vicious, powerful movement, and threw him across the room where he landed in a heap, unmoving. The ballroom had descended into a full-scale battle. The royal guards, now fully mobilized and many in wolf form, were efficiently dispatching the intruders. But Riley's focus was narrow, centered on the dais. She turned back to see Marcus land a glancing blow on Caspian's side with a hidden blade, the silver burning through fabric and flesh. Caspian grunted in pain, stumbling back a step. A red stain blossomed on his black tunic. Rage, white-hot and absolute, consumed Riley. No one hurt her mate. She let out a howl, a sound filled with fury and a challenge, and charged. Marcus turned, his eyes wide with disbelief at the sight of the powerful wolf bearing down on him. He had only ever known her as a cowering, wolfless Omega. This fierce, magnificent creature was an impossibility. His hesitation was his undoing. She didn't slow, crashing into him with her full weight, sending them both tumbling off the dais. Her claws scrabbled for purchase on the slick marble floor. He tried to bring his own knife around, but she was faster, her jaws snapping shut on his arm, crushing bone. He roared in agony, the fight draining out of him as he stared into the silver eyes of the wolf he had tormented for years. This was not the broken thing he had owned. This was a queen. Caspian, his face a mask of grim fury, was on him a second later. He hauled the whimpering, broken alpha to his feet with one hand, his other pressing against his own bleeding side. The punishment for treason, for violating the Omega Protection Accords, and for harming a member of the royal family, is death, Caspian pronounced, his voice ringing with absolute authority through the now quieting ballroom. The remaining rogues had been subdued, many dead, the rest in chains. Marcus looked from Caspian's merciless face to the black wolf standing protectively at his side, a low growl still rumbling in her chest. He finally understood. "Mate," he choked out, the realization dawning in his terrified eyes. "She's your—" Caspian didn't let him finish. With a swift, final movement, he ended Marcus Thorne's miserable existence. A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by a deafening silence. The king had executed an enemy of the crown in the middle of his ballroom, defending his chosen mate. Caspian stood over the body for a moment, his chest heaving. Then he turned to Riley. His golden alpha eyes met her silver wolf ones. The world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in the center of the room. He took a hesitant step toward her. He didn't see a beast. He saw her. He saw his mate in all her newfound glory. Slowly, tenderly, he reached out a hand, not to her fur, but to the air in front of her muzzle. It was an invitation, a question. Riley took a step forward, closing the distance, and gently nudged his hand with her nose. A wave of emotion passed between them through the contact, relief, pride, and a love so profound it was a physical force. His wolf called to hers, a silent song of reunion and belonging, and hers answered, a vow of devotion and partnership. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of the attack, they were perfectly, completely mated, their bond forged in fire and sealed in loyalty. The pack watched in silent reverence. They had just witnessed the birth of their Luna. Not a fragile princess to be protected, but a warrior queen who had fought for her king. Riley, in her powerful wolf form, stood beside Caspian, no longer a shadow, but his equal, his other half. The fear was gone forever, replaced by the unshakable certainty that she was finally, truly home. The aftermath of the battle was handled with swift and silent efficiency. The royal guards cleared the ballroom, their faces grim but resolute. Healers tended to the few who were injured, their calm voices a soothing balm in the chaotic silence. Caspian's wound was shallow, a testament to his skill, and was quickly cleaned and bandaged, despite his protests that Riley should be seen to first. Throughout it all, he never left Riley's side. She remained in her wolf form, a powerful, calming presence in the center of the storm. The shift back to her human shape was not as violent as the first. It was a conscious decision, a gentle unwinding of power. She closed her eyes, focused on the woman she now was, and felt the change ripple through her. Bones shortened, fur receded, and she was left kneeling on the marble floor, clad in the tattered remains of her beautiful gown. She felt a cloak settle over her shoulders. Caspian was kneeling in front of her, his expression a mixture of awe and profound tenderness. He gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending a shiver through her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She had a wolf. She had shifted. She had fought. The reality of it was still sinking in. "You were magnificent," he breathed, cupping her face in his hands. "My brave, magnificent mate." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She buried her face in his shoulder, inhaling his scent, and finally let the adrenaline and shock give way to the overwhelming sense of safety his embrace provided. She wasn't broken. She wasn't weak. The strength had been inside her all along, sleeping, waiting for the right reason to wake up. He was the reason. Kale appeared at Caspian's side, his formal demeanor firmly back in place, though his clothes were torn and bloodied. "Your Majesty, we've secured all the rogues, 15 dead, 8 in custody. Preliminary interrogation suggests they had inside assistance." "I know," Caspian said darkly. "Marcus mentioned it. Find out who. I want names by morning." "Already on it. And Caspian," Kale's voice softened slightly, "you should know. The garrison commander at the northern post has been found dead in his quarters, poisoned. That's how Marcus escaped. They killed the one man who could have stopped them and walked out with stolen uniforms." Caspian's jaw clenched. "A coordinated conspiracy. This goes deeper than I thought." "We'll root them out," Kale promised. "Every last one." He glanced at Riley with something that looked like respect and perhaps a touch of awe. "She saved your life, you know. That rogue with the silver blade would have hit a vital organ if she hadn't taken him down." Caspian tightened his hold on Riley. "I know," he said softly. He led her from the ballroom, away from the prying eyes, and up to his private chambers. They were simpler than her guest suite, more masculine, filled with books and maps and the lingering scent of him. He led her to a sofa before the large stone fireplace and lit a fire, the flames casting a warm, dancing glow across the room. He sat beside her, not touching, but close enough that you could feel the heat radiating from his body. "We need to talk," he said softly. She nodded, her heart thumping. "My wolf," she began, her voice still shaky. "I didn't know." "I did," he said, a small smile touching his lips. "Well, my wolf did. It sensed yours from the beginning, sleeping beneath the surface. The trauma you endured forced it into dormancy to protect you. It needed to know you were safe before it could emerge." It made a strange kind of sense. Her wolf had hidden itself away, a last desperate act of self-preservation. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "It wasn't my secret to tell," he replied, his gaze serious. "It was your power to reclaim, in your own time. I would have waited a lifetime for you, Riley, whether you had a wolf or not. Your strength is not in your ability to shift. It's in here." He gently tapped his finger over her heart, It's the resilience that allowed you to survive, the courage that made you run, the bravery that made you steal my car." She laughed, a watery, shaky sound. "I'm sorry about your car. And your window." "It was the luckiest grand theft and vandalism in the history of the kingdom," he said, his eyes twinkling. The humor broke the tension, and the last of her fear melted away. This was real. This powerful, kind, incredible man was her mate, and she was his. "Caspian," she said, her voice finding its strength. "When you asked me at the ball to be your mate, your Luna, my answer is yes." A look of pure, unadulterated joy transformed his face. He looked younger, the burdens of his crown momentarily forgotten. He took her hand, his thumbs stroking over her knuckles. "There is a ceremony," he said. "A formal declaration before the pack, under the full moon. It will seal our bond, both physically and spiritually. It will make you their queen." "I don't know how to be a queen," she confessed, a flicker of the old insecurity returning. "You don't have to know," he said, his voice firm and reassuring. "You just have to be you. A queen protects her people. You have already proven you are willing to fight for what you love. That is all they will ever ask of you. All I will ever ask of you." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Run with me under the moon, Riley," he whispered, a line of the traditional mating vow. "Be the other half of my soul." "Always," she whispered back, sealing her promise. The bond between them flared, a bright, warm light that filled every dark corner of her past. She was no longer Riley Dawson, the runaway Omega. She was Riley Vale, mate to the Alpha King, and soon to be Luna Queen of the strongest pack in the land. Her new life was just beginning. The ceremony was held 3 nights later, on the peak of the full moon. The entire pack gathered in the sacred circle, an ancient ring of stones high in the mountains overlooking the palace. Torches cast a flickering golden light on the assembled faces, their eyes filled with anticipation and reverence. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Riley stood beside Caspian, not behind him. She wore a simple white gown, her dark hair unbound and flowing down her back. She felt a calm she had never known, a deep sense of rightness that resonated in her very bones. She was not afraid. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Kale, in his role as Beta, stepped forward to begin the ritual. "We gather tonight under the eyes of the moon goddess," he intoned, his voice carrying across the clearing. "We gather to witness a sacred union, a fated bond that strengthens our pack and secures our future." He looked to Caspian. "Alpha King, do you come before your pack with a free heart and a clear mind to claim the one your soul has chosen?" Caspian turned to face Riley, his dark eyes glowing with golden light, his love for her a palpable force that washed over the crowd. He took both of her hands in his. "I do," he said, his voice ringing with power and devotion. "I, Caspian of the House of Vale, Alpha of this pack and King of these lands, come before you tonight to claim my mate." He looked deep into her eyes, speaking to her and her alone. "Riley Dawson, my wolf recognized you from the first moment. You are my mate, my other half. I choose you before all witnesses, now and for all my days." He then turned to the pack. "Do you accept her? Do you accept this woman as your Luna, your queen, to stand beside me, to lead you, and to protect you?" A single unified voice rose from the crowd. "We do!" The sound was a roar of approval, a wave of acceptance that washed over Riley, healing the last of her old wounds. It was Kale's turn to address her. "Riley Dawson, your journey has been hard, but it has brought you home. Do you accept this Alpha as your mate? Do you accept this pack as your family? Do you accept the title of Luna Queen, with all the duties and devotion it requires?" Riley looked from the sea of hopeful faces back to the man who held her hands, the man who had saved her in more ways than one. Her own eyes began to glow, the silver light of her wolf shining through. "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong, filled with a conviction that came from her very soul. I accept Caspian Vale as my mate. I accept this pack as my family. I will be your Luna, and I will protect you with my life. As she spoke the words, a visible shimmer of light pulsed from their joined hands, a wave of energy that washed over the entire pack, sealing the bond not just between the two of them, but between the Luna and her people. Caspian smiled, a look of pure love on his face. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was not one of fiery passion, but of deep, profound connection. It was a promise, a vow, and a homecoming all in one. It sealed the ceremony. When they broke apart, the clearing erupted in joyous howls, a chorus of celebration that echoed through the mountains and up to the full moon above. Later that night, long after the celebrations had quieted, Caspian led Riley by the hand back to the sacred circle. It was empty now, bathed in the serene silver light of the moon. "There is one last part of the ceremony," he said softly. "The part that is just for us." He began to undress, and she followed his lead, their movements unhurried and natural. When they were bare, he stepped closer, his body a perfect complement to hers. The air around them began to crackle with energy. "Run with me," he whispered, and the change took him. His body shifted, bones elongating, fur sprouting, until the great, powerful black wolf that was his other self stood before her. His golden eyes beckoned. Riley smiled and let her own wolf answer the call. The shift was as easy as breathing now, a joyful release of power. In moments, two wolves stood in the moonlight. He was a creature of shadow and power, she of midnight and grace. He nudged her muzzle with his, a gesture of wolfish affection. Then he turned and bounded away into the trees, a silent invitation. She followed, her paws barely seeming to touch the ground. They ran through the forest, side by side, a blur of black and silver under the moon. There were no words, no titles, no past, no future. There was only the run, the wind in their fur, the earth beneath their paws, and the unbreakable bond that connected them, soul to soul. She was not an omega. He was not a king. They were simply mates, two halves of a whole, finally running free, together. Months turned into a year. Luna Queen Riley settled into her role with a grace and wisdom that surprised everyone but her mate. Her past, which she had once seen as a source of shame and weakness, became her greatest strength. She had an empathy for the lowest-ranking members of the pack that no royal-born Luna could ever possess. She championed the rights of omegas, ensuring the accords Caspian had cited were not just words on paper, but a living reality in every pack under his rule. She established safe houses, education programs, and a system of support that transformed their society from the ground up. She was beloved not for her title, but for her compassion. The conspiracy that had freed Marcus was rooted out within weeks of the attack. It had been led by a handful of disgruntled nobles, including relatives of Lady Seraphina, who had resented Caspian's progressive policies and his choice of an omega mate. They had paid with their lives or their freedom, and the pack was stronger for their removal. The pack flourished under their joint rule. Caspian's strength and authority, tempered by Riley's kindness and insight, created an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. They were a perfect balance, the king and queen their people had always needed. Riley's relationship with her wolf, whom she had named Hope, deepened every day. It was no longer a stranger, but an integral part of her. They ran together often, finding a freedom in their animal forms that was a balm to their souls. They would race through the royal forests, their howls a song of joy to the moon, their bond a silent, perfect conversation. One crisp autumn afternoon, Riley was in the gardens, her hands in the soil as she helped the pack gardeners tend to the starlight roses, when a wave of dizziness washed over her. She steadied herself on the low stone wall, a strange protective instinct flaring in her chest. Hope was suddenly alert inside her, a low, contented purr rumbling in a way she'd never felt before. Caspian found her there a few minutes later, his brow furrowed with concern. He could always sense her emotions through the bond, and her sudden unease had called to him from across the estate. "Riley, what is it?" he asked, kneeling beside her and taking her hand. She looked up at him, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across her face. She took his large, calloused hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I think," she said, her voice filled with awe, "that our pack is about to get a little bigger." Caspian froze, his eyes widening. He looked from her face to her stomach and back again. The bond between them flooded with his emotions, shock, disbelief, and then a wave of overwhelming, fierce, protective joy that was so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. He let out a whoop of laughter, the sound echoing through the quiet garden. He swept her up into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed with him. The mighty Alpha King, a conqueror and a ruler, was utterly undone by the promise of a child. He set her down gently, his hands framing her face, as he looked at her with a reverence that humbled her. "A pup," he breathed. "Our pup." That night, they lay curled together in their bed, the fire crackling in the hearth. His hand rested possessively on her stomach, a silent promise of protection. "I never thought I would have this," Riley whispered into the quiet of the room. "A home, a family, a mate who loves me." Caspian tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer. "I was a king, but I was living in a gray world," he murmured into her hair. "You brought the color back, Riley. You saved me just as much as I saved you." She thought back to that desperate, terrified night, to the sleek black car that had seemed like her only hope, to the sound of shattering glass and the roar of an engine. She had been running from a monster, only to run straight into the arms of her destiny. The woman who had stolen a car had, in turn, stolen the heart of a king. And in finding him, she had finally found herself. No longer a victim, no longer a stray, but a queen, a mother, and a mate. Loved, cherished, and finally, completely home.